This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello and welcome to the Sunday Lunch Show on Teachers Talk Radio. The topic of today's show is critical thinking, and my guest is the teacher Stanley. Stephanie is a science teacher and founder of a critical thinking site for kids.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Sunday Lunch Show, everyone. Thanks for joining me. I'm Graham Stanley, speaking to you live from Mexico City. As I mentioned earlier, on today's show, I'll be talking about critical literacy with teacher Stanley. Stanley is a teacher and founder of CritiKids.com, a critical thinking site for kids and teens. She was inspired to become a critical thinking educator when she was teaching science to kids while at the same time seeing vast amounts of science illiteracy on social media. She realized that teaching science facts wasn't enough, and that kids also needed to learn what science is and how it works. More generally, Stephanie realized that kids need to learn how to interpret information and communicate it effectively. And she looked for critical thinking resources for kids to help, but she struggled to find them. That's why she decided to make her own. Stephanie also shares critical thinking content for teens and adults on social media. And I'll be talking to Stephanie about critical thinking and more after the Teachers Talk Radio news.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC focuses on unpaid and low-paid internships, which a new study says are unfair to working-class graduates and increasingly favour those from a middle-class background. Research from the Sutton Trust is featured in the report, and it says the gap between the two demographics is growing, driven by employers continuing to underpay interns and giving opportunities to family and friends rather than advertising them. A poll of 1,200 recent graduates shows half have undertaken an internship, a 12% increase since 2018. But the gap between working and middle-class graduates has widened from 12% to 20%. The proportion of working-class graduates completing an internship is now only 36% compared to 55% for their middle-class peers. There is also a north-south divide, with graduates in London more likely to have undertaken an internship than those in the West Midlands, Yorkshire and Scotland. The report also says that in many cases those undertaking unpaid internships were able to do so only because they received money from parents, lived at home or with family or friends, or used savings to support themselves. The Sutton Trust also found that internships were almost twice as likely to have been found through family and friends in an organisation compared to an advertisement, further contributing to the widening access gap. As part of its Make Work Pay plan issued before the election, Labour said it wanted to ban unpaid internships, aside from those that form part of an education or training course, although details haven't been confirmed. According to ITV News, Brighton University Academies Trust is to stop running several schools after an alleged budget scandal. The Trust has reportedly told government it plans to hand its portfolio of academies over to other providers. The Trust currently runs 11 primary schools and 3 secondary schools in Sussex, and is believed to have kept around 20% from individual school funding. Staff at 5 of the schools in the Trust went on strike earlier this year. In a letter to parents, the Trust says it is facing times of challenge and times of change. and a spokesperson for them said the trustees have informed the Department of Education of their desire to seek to transfer the academies in the trust to other academy trusts. A DFE spokesperson said they would work to select the strongest alternative providers for each of the schools to ensure a smooth transition. Further details can be found on the ITVX website. In a government website press release, the Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson announces what is described as a digital revolution. As part of her keynote address at the BET Show, she set out plans to harness technology to transform teaching. By using tech at every stage, she stated this would break down barriers to opportunity by ensuring every student and teacher can access the tools and support they need to succeed. She also spoke about artificial intelligence as a radical modernising force for change, whilst acknowledging safety concerns and a plan to work with tech companies to make AI safe for classroom use. Phillipson also spoke about plans to use tech to transform outcomes for vulnerable pupils, including those with SEND, by improving accessibility for all. Full details can be found on the gov.uk website. Finally, the Glasgow Herald features advice to students planning to start university this autumn. The article serves as a reminder of the approaching UCAS deadline on the 29th of January at 6 p.m, including the online form, personal statements and letter of recommendations from schools, which all must be uploaded. Late applications are possible, but only those received by the deadline are guaranteed to be given equal consideration by universities. The article also refers to the Sunday Times Good University Guide 2025 to help students make their choices, with the London School of Economics taking top spot. Scotland's oldest university, St Andrews, is in second place. Top 10 places are also awarded to the likes of the universities of Oxford and Cambridge, University College London and Loughborough University. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm here with Stephanie. How are you today, Stephanie?
Hi, I'm great, thank you. How are you?
Very well, thank you. So, Stephanie, what I'd love to do is to start these shows by asking my guests about their educational background and how they became interested in teaching. What was it for you? Was it something that you always wanted to do since you were young, or was it something else?
Yeah, I was one of those kids who always loved school. So I think I always knew I would end up in education somehow, although my journey has been a little bit non-traditional. So my educational background is in biology and philosophy, which people always said is a very strange combination of subjects, but I think they complemented each other pretty well. They both try to make sense of the world just in different ways. And as soon as I graduated, so at 21 years old, I moved to Korea and I was working in a private academy there, a Hagwon they're called. So it's a kind of after school program. So this was my first time moving abroad and my first time teaching. So that was a really interesting first teaching experience because I was also adapting to a new culture and living in a country where I didn't know anybody.
Wow.
But yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, what age of kids were you teaching?
It was ages 7 to about 13. It was a long time ago now. It was 2009 to 2010 that I was there. But that really taught me the value of making teaching fun because it's an after-school program and these children were so overworked because they had already spent all day in school and then they had to go home, try to do their homework, and then go to an after-school program where they got more homework, more lessons. And of course, they didn't want to be there. And that was very understandable. So that's when I learned that it's really important to gamify education or make it fun somehow so they feel like they're playing. I'm not sure how well I implemented that lesson at the time when I was 21 years old, but at least I started to see its value.
And were you teaching English or were you teaching philosophy or biology through
So
English?
I've taught everything actually in all different countries to all different ages. At that time, it was ESL, but I've taught philosophy to undergraduate students in Canada in a tutorial setting when I was doing my master's degree, because eventually I went back to Canada to do a master's in philosophy. And I taught science to middle school and high school students in Thailand. And I also most recently, I taught science online to grades 3 to 7. So those online science classes were really nice because it's just 1 or 2 students per class, so more of a tutorial than a class. And there was a lot of flexibility. So I've had quite a diverse teaching background, all ages, subjects, and countries and platforms.
Wow. Before we move on to critical thinking, which is the main topic of today's show, I'd love to hear more about how you try to implement gamification in your classes.
Okay, what I'm working on now is I'm making educational content for the internet. So I'm not actually teaching live students. So that for me has been actually the easiest way to implement it. So I make my courses into adventures. Sci-fi adventures. So they watch videos about a story, or depending on the course, there might be animated videos, and they go through an adventure where they have to solve a problem, like they're on a spaceship and there's a mysterious case of memory loss, and trying to look for clues and find out what the source of the memory loss is. So for me, starting to work online and use education technology is how I was really able to figure out how to gamify education. And I want to do even more now. I want to learn more, maybe make a Minecraft game someday, but I need to learn how Minecraft works first, because that's a little bit overwhelming. That's a lot to learn, I feel. So I do think technology is so beneficial for education and for making it fun.
Yeah. So that sounds really interesting, because a lot of the criticism that I've read about gamification is when it focuses just upon points and leaderboards and badges, etc. So I like the idea that you are taking the element of story that you find in a lot of games and using that as the main driving point. I think that's a really interesting thing to do.
Yeah, the games I make don't have a competitive aspect at all, and they're not multiplayer games, no team or anything like that. Although I have considered that, because I thought that might be motivating for some students. I haven't actually heard the criticism that you're referring to.
I think the easy thing about gamification, and I'm not really talking about education, I'm talking about gamification in general when it's applied to work and all sorts of other non-game contexts, is just to kind of award people points for things they do, publish a leaderboard, give badges out. And that's a kind of superficial aspect of gamification that is a bit behaviorist. So it has been criticized because of that. And I'm a big fan of gamification. I have applied it with students in classes in the past. And I do think there is a time and a place for those kinds of aspects of gamification. But when you do, for example, turn your class into an interactive story, or if you do the kind of things that you just outlined, like adventures, I think that's where the real benefits of gamification can come. That when you have students really absorbed and immersed into something that they're interested in, that's when it really can be very useful, I think.
Yeah, I've become a strong proponent of teaching through stories lately, because it's such a great way to make abstract concepts concrete. Because some of the things I teach about, like logical fallacies and cognitive biases and that kind of stuff, you need to give real world examples. And I think the best way to do that is through a story. And it also, of course, it makes it more fun too, but it also, I think, helps to make the lessons more memorable.
Yes, definitely. Oh, that sounds great. Really, really interesting. Stephanie, you got interested in critical thinking at some point, and it became an important aspect of your teaching. What was it about critical thinking that you thought was important? Why should kids have critical thinking as a major part of the curriculum, for example?
You really don't need to spend too much time on social media to see how desperate the need is for better communication skills. and better information literacy, data literacy skills, and even intellectual humility. So right now we have, even though my focus is teaching critical thinking to kids, I think it's important for everyone. I just think we can teach it to kids, and all the resources I found were targeted towards adults. So that's what actually why I started my project, is because I started teaching a little bit of critical thinking stuff to my own students, and I could see they could understand it and they really enjoyed it. So I think we need to start teaching it as early as we possibly can, because right now we can communicate with so many people every day, strangers on the internet, but we don't really have communication skills to communicate rationally and respectfully. And we have access to so much information, but we don't have the skills to analyze it rationally either, which I think is dangerous. So I teach, my critical thinking courses actually are for ages 5 and up. So I think we really need to get these lessons in as soon as we possibly can.
Yeah, I have to say, I completely agree with you. I think, as you said, on social media, on websites, the online world in particular, but not only, is just full of more and more information that everyone, kids included, need to navigate and understand. What they read or hear or see is not necessarily true, especially in the world of today's world, where there's so much sort of fake news. Artificial intelligence is making it easier to actually create convincing videos of people that look true but they're not, etc. I think it's quite a challenge you've set yourself, particularly at that age. I imagine there are a lot of different ways you approach it when it comes to 5-year-olds, which is very different to when it comes to 14-year-olds, for example. I'd love to hear how you kind of approach critical thinking with a 5-year-old, for example, and then perhaps contrast it with an older learner, a teenager, for example. That would be really interesting.
So I have only one course right now for 5-year-olds. It's for 5 to 8-year-olds, and it's about emotional intelligence. So it might surprise some people to think that emotional intelligence would be part of critical thinking, but when we can understand the reasons for our feelings, and maybe more importantly, be able to manage them, we can think more clearly. And so that's the focus of this particular course, which I made in partnership with a child psychologist, Dr. Ronald Crouch, who's also a huge advocate of critical thinking and has written books about critical thinking, but also learning empathy and how to communicate with others is also an important part of critical thinking. So the course I have now is more about understanding and managing your own feelings, but I would like to add something someday about emotional intelligence in terms of empathy. So that's what I do for the little kids. And I might add another course someday with music, because I think little kids respond really well to music, and I could teach some topics like cause and effect, but I would need a partner for that because I'm not a musical person at all, unfortunately. So then for the slightly older kids, like in the 8 to 12 age range, I teach about logical fallacies. So those are bad arguments, like the straw man argument would be a really famous logical fallacy where you misrepresent your opponent's viewpoint and then attack that misrepresented argument rather than their actual argument. And there's so many logical fallacies, I can't even count them all. I feel like there's new ones being invented all the time. But yeah, that age range, I would say even in some cases, ages 7 can start learning about logical fallacies. The youngest who's ever done that course was 6 years old, but that was with the help of a parent. And then for the even older kids, like ages 12 and up, is when I start getting into common errors in data analysis. So that's stuff like assuming correlation entails causation, or some biases like the clustering illusion, seeing patterns when they're not there. And also I teach for teens formal logic or symbolic logic, which is about how to build and analyze rational arguments. And that I've never seen anything that's not for adults.
That's really interesting then. You very clearly set out what the difference in how you approach different age of learners. How do the kids respond usually to that, in particular with the logical fallacies? Is it something that is completely new to them?
Yeah, they love it. I think that's my most popular course by far, because that's the one where I actually hired an animator to animate the story. So it's really fun for them, and you're on a spaceship and you're in the cyberspace trying to figure out why there's so much trolling and misinformation in cyberspace, and looking for the lost logic board and encountering lots of logical fallacies along the way. And there's some games built into that course too. And they start spotting logical fallacies everywhere, which is pretty cool to hear that they're starting to apply what they learn, because you can see them, in TV shows and movies. And I'm not so sure how parents might feel about this, but the adults commit logical fallacies too, right? So they might sometimes call out their parents for saying, you have to go to bed at 9 p.m. And the kid says, why? And they say, because that's your bedtime. Oh, that's circular reasoning. But, most of the parents that are buying these courses for their kids are probably happy to see that they can apply what they've learned. So really happy to see the feedback. And even before I started this project, and I was teaching kids logical fallacies just in my online courses, and they loved it there too. I would say this is the most popular critical thinking topic among kids.
Wow. And how did you come up with this idea of using scenarios to help teach this?
Because I was doing it with my own students online, and I saw that it worked. You need to think of examples, I guess, to explain the fallacies. So if you're already having an example of a statement or two statements that demonstrate a fallacy, I figure why not build it into at least a little short story. And then, I guess I was just kind of lucky that it worked. So I kept up with that method.
What about the students who perhaps have more difficulty in grasping this? Do you come across that?
So the way I check this is to get them to make their own stories. And sometimes they sort of misunderstand the fallacy. So in those cases, I just give more examples, and then they usually get it. So sometimes it just takes, I think even for adults, having a few examples of some logical fallacies to see how it works in different scenarios is helpful. So just with the kids, I try to think of more kid-friendly examples or examples that they can relate to. So sometimes, it does take a little bit more time, but I've never experienced any logical fallacies that they just couldn't get at all. Just some took a little longer than others.
And something, as you said before, there are so many logical fallacies. How do you decide which ones are the most important ones that they need to know? Does it change depending on the age group or the kid or any other reasons, or is it you have a set number of the main ones, and what are they?
So I teach 10 of them right in my course right now, and I do want to do a part 2 sometime with 10 more. But the way that I chose these 10, it was just based on the ones that came up with my students in class. So I already had experience teaching them. So then I thought, okay, I'll build those ones into the class, because I kind of know how to talk to students about these fallacies already. So, and it was actually just sort of random in that sense. They had come up before, I taught them before, so I stuck with them. But I don't think that, they're the most important fallacies necessarily. It's kind of an interesting question, though, if you were to ask me what's the most interesting logical fallacy or the most important logical fallacy to teach, that's really tough one to answer.
Well, sorry for putting you on the spot. But what about when it comes to kind of approaching information that is available on the internet now, that maybe, I think, is probably an important aspect of critical thinking for kids? Is there a logical fallacy, or is there something else that you do to help equip children, teenagers, to kind of deal with that scenario?
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Meet USA Study, your one-stop platform for guiding students through their college application journey. Access up-to-date resources on universities, programs, scholarships, and application requirements, all in one place. Get easy-to-access tools, personalised timelines, expert tips, application templates, and exclusive webinars with admissions officers to help your student stand out. Visit usastudy.co.uk or call Phil at 0800 612 8271 because every student deserves the opportunity to shine with USA Study.
Thinking about critical literacy and or logical fallacies that help students understand, when it comes to helping students deal with, for example, information on the internet or elsewhere that is potentially not true, is there a particular logical fallacy or aspect of critical thinking that you think is important to help them deal with that type of scenario?
So I would say that data literacy is really important for that. A lot of information on the internet isn't exactly not true, but it's misleading somehow.
Right.
Like it might be true, but it makes you draw certain conclusions very intentionally from it that you really shouldn't be drawing from that information. So I can give a few examples.
Great.
People are saying that cancer prevalence has been increasing over the last 50 years and using this to draw the conclusion that that progress hasn't been made against the disease, leaving out considerations like life expectancy is increasing. And people are more likely to get cancer when they're older. So death from other causes is decreasing. And also the prevalence is about how many people are living with the disease, not incidence, which is the number of new cases. So if we have better cancer treatments, people will live longer with the disease, which will actually increase prevalence. But it's a good thing because it means we have better treatment. So that's a way that data and also maybe better screening processes leads to more diagnoses. So this increase in prevalence can actually indicate better screening, better treatment, and generally longer life expectancy, which are all good things, but you can see how someone could use that to try to convince people that we're getting less healthy. Or what's an example? I saw an example today. Oh, and I've seen this a few times where people talk about, sorry to keep coming back to the cancer example, but that's the example I saw today. Someone said, I have 3 friends who were diagnosed with cancer and they took this alternative treatment. I don't even really like to say what they say because sometimes when you quote misinformation, even to debunk it, it can make people more likely to believe it. So these people took alternative treatment X. Now they don't have cancer. Not only is that an anecdote, which I think a lot of people know is the lowest on the evidence hierarchy, but he's implying that they don't have cancer because of that treatment. And he didn't mention whether or not they got conventional treatment too. So it's really good to ask ourselves, I think this is just such an important for everyone. What am I missing here? What information is missing? What questions might I ask before I draw any conclusions? I did see a woman advertising on Instagram this wellness retreat, also for cancer. And she says, you know, I had cancer, I went here, I don't have cancer. And everything she said is true. Yes, she had cancer. Yes, she went to the wellness retreat. Yes, she doesn't have cancer now. But if you look into it, she also got conventional treatment and she leaves that out. So a question we all need to ask is, and we should teach kids to ask, is what am I missing here? What am I not seeing? Which actually can be tied to a common cognitive bias called the survivorship bias, which is where you just focus on the people who have made it past a certain selection process, and you ignore all the non-survivors or the people that didn't make it past that selection process. So actually, I think that might be one of the most interesting biases to teach kids and everyone is survivorship bias, because it trains you to ask, what am I missing? What am I not seeing here? Another trending statistic is only 2% of what do you call it? The venture capital, the investment for startups is given to businesses that are run only by female or founded only by females. So that looks pretty bad. That looks like there's a lot of sexual discrimination. But then you might ask, what else do I need to know to make sense of this data? What might be missing here? And what you need there is the base rate. How many businesses are founded solely by women? And if that number is 2%, then that makes you look at the data in a different way. Then you might have other questions like, well, why are only 2% of startups founded only by women? But once you get past these mistakes in data analysis, you can get to more interesting questions.
Really interesting, Stephanie. So the reliability of the, I'm going to say data, because I'm from the UK rather than data, but of the data is so important, and getting students to understand that is a kind of fundamental. So in the examples you've given, or with another example you might use with the actual learners, how would you approach beginning to get them to understand this? Would you do it through story as well, or would you do it through actual data?
Through story, but you can incorporate data into the story. So for example, survivorship bias is one of the topics I teach kids in my statistical odyssey course, and they are trying to decide whether or not they can take a shortcut, and they have some reason to believe it might be dangerous, but they have reports of 10 ships that have made it safely through the shortcut, no problem at all. So they're thinking, oh, of course it's fine, let's take the shortcut. And then they're presented with the question, what else should you ask here? What information might be missing? And then they can answer, how many ships didn't make it through? How many ships entered and didn't come out? And then they can see, numbers, maybe 100 ships never made it out, and then make the decision not to take the shortcut. So you use a little bit of numbers, but it can still be woven into a story. I definitely wouldn't want to teach it just using numbers like a math class, because
it wouldn't
not
be
really
as engaging,
as
I
fun.
suppose. It's not as fun or engaging.
And these are all things that do happen in real life, right? They don't just happen in some abstract mathematical world. They do affect our decisions, and we need to consider them to make good, rational decisions. So tying them into, even if it's sort of a fantasy scenario, like you're in a spaceship, I think helps students to see how these scenarios might apply to their own decisions.
Yeah. I've just thought of something that is very typical in day-to-day life, and it has come up before in the past with learners, is this idea of smoking. Smoking being bad for you. And then there's always someone, be it a learner or if you're talking to friends, etc., about this, who will use the argument, oh, well, I have an uncle who's 93 years old and he smokes 20 cigarettes a day and he's fine.
Yeah, I actually use that exact example too.
Do you?
Yeah.
So how would you use that how would you counter that, or how would you start approaching that kind of viewpoint?
Okay, if a child said that?
If a teenager was, for example, was smoking, and you had started a discussion about smoking being bad, and then they say, well, my grandfather's 95 years old and he smokes constantly.
So I guess depending on the context of how this comes up, how much time I have, I would say that's an example of an anecdote. I think giving things names is helpful.
Yeah.
Giving these types of things labels. So an anecdote is a personal story, something that happened to you or someone you know, and explain the value of anecdotes, because they're not totally worthless. They can be useful for generating hypotheses. They can, if they're anecdotes about us, they might affect our decisions, such as I feel sick whenever I eat peanut butter, so now I don't eat peanut butter. I wouldn't tell other people not to eat peanut butter, but this personal story helps me make my decisions. And then explain the limitations of anecdotes. And, if I have enough time and freedom in the class, I could show them a pyramid with the hierarchy of evidence from strongest to weakest, and the anecdotes are at the very bottom of this pyramid. So, we might learn something from them sometimes, but we need to learn they're the weakest type of evidence, and there's lots of evidence higher in this pyramid that shows that smoking is unhealthy. So that would be maybe one way to. The reason I like this pyramid is because it's visual. I haven't thought about how to incorporate it into a story. There's probably a way to do that. That gives me something to think about after.
Great.
But actually, every time I brought that example up with kids, they know right away that that's just one person, and they shouldn't draw conclusions based on one person. Kids are really good at getting that one.
Yeah, it's maybe the adults who are trying to find justification for continuing to smoke.
Yeah.
For example, or other things. So, Stephanie, what about your feelings about, I'm sure you have strong feelings about this, about data validation, critical literacy becoming more and more important. We touched upon it earlier because of the kind of information we're all exposed to on social media. And in particular, it's quite relevant because very recently, Facebook, for example, Meta has made that announcement that they've stopped employing, or they're going to stop employing fact checkers and allow for a lot more liberal views on their platforms. How do you feel about that, and how do you think that's going to affect the way teachers, not just yourself or with your courses, but teachers in general, need to approach data validation or critical literacy?
Yeah. So, I haven't been following that news too closely. I'm not really sure how effective the Meta fact checking was in the first place. I mean, I've seen so much misinformation there, but it could be an example of survivorship bias, right? Where actually 99% of it got blocked, and I'm seeing the 1% that gets through and thinking, it's failing. So
I guess we're going to see a change or notice a change, and then it will be more clear in the way that when Twitter became X, and the fact checkers who and kind of censorship of Twitter was to a large extent removed. There was a distinct change there, or at least.
Yeah, I only got. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, at least that's what a lot of people have been saying.
I only got on Twitter about a year and a half ago. It was already X actually when I got on. So personally, I didn't see the change. I think the community notes is a pretty good feature, but I don't know what it was like beforehand. But I can talk more on like how I recommend kids fact check,
Sure.
Some strategies for fact checking. So lateral reading is really recommended for checking a source, because if you check the source itself, it can be lying about itself. So you can teach kids to examine, a website itself, look at the About Us section, try to find out stuff about the site itself, but you really have to check other sites. Or any claims you find. Let's actually stick with the social media example, since that's what you were talking about. So if you see a claim, some celebrity died, that's for whatever reason, a really common type of misinformation I've seen on social media. So some celebrity died. Yeah, you can check that person's profile to see if they're a trustworthy person, but then better to check other sources, such as news sites. Have the major news sites reported on this person's death? If not, then it's highly unlikely that that post is true. And then fact-checking websites like Snopes is a really good one. So to make it really simple for kids, sometimes depending on the situation, you might need to vary it, but you can tell them use a 3-tab method. So in the first tab, you investigate the source itself. In the second tab, you use other websites or news outlets to verify the claim. And then in the third tab, you use specific fact-checking sites like Snopes. You might not need all 3 for all claims, but that's a pretty good rule, I'd say, to give kids to generally follow to fact check.
And not just kids, but adults as well.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Everything I say, I think can be applied to adults.
But yeah, we're talking about teaching kids, of course. But I'm just thinking, there's so much sort of misinformation that I see posted online. I think Snopes is my go-to site as well. If I see a claim that someone, the usual one that I see is that about owning data and being able to do whatever the site being able to do whatever they like with your data, or don't publish photographs on this and stuff. And people are sort of saying, usually that kind of post is a bit like the digital equivalent of the chain letter in the past, where people are sort of saying, if you don't share this, then something really bad will happen. And so the whole idea is just for the information to be replicated. It's not particularly harmful. It's just wasting time. And that is the most common thing that I see, for example. It's a bit like it's a bit like the kind of rumors that were spread in the past before the internet, that people would say, oh, I heard a friend of a friend told me this, blah blah blah, and these rumors would be spread among communities. And quite often, every time those kind of stories were told, they'd be changed or expanded a bit, because people like telling stories and people like getting reactions from the stories they're told. That's probably the root of all this, isn't it?
It reminds me a lot of emails I used to get when I was a kid that were very scary. And they said, if you don't forward this email to 7 people in the next 7 minutes, you'll die.
Yes.
It's actually exactly the same thing, because that's what makes it spread, is the fear and the threat of what will happen if you don't spread it. And these Facebook, well, I mostly see it on Facebook, that you have to share this to protect your data, also is causing fear.
And I guess apart from that type of misinformation, you also have the other type of misinformation, which has a more kind of evil intent, if you like, where people are trying to change people's mind about how to vote in a particular way, or they're trying to get money from people by getting them to do something, or to change their opinions towards minority groups and stuff. Is that something you deal with explicitly in when it comes to your courses, critical thinking, data, or do you tend to kind of stay away from that aspect of it, of this area?
So I'm working on media literacy stuff now. So that's probably where that will come up. in the marketing and persuasion techniques section. So no, I don't really cover it explicitly right now, besides maybe a little bit in the logical fallacies course, because if you learn about bad arguments, because logical fallacies are sometimes done by accident, but sometimes they're done on purpose to direct the argument in the way you want it to go. So they can be used to manipulate the person that you're talking to. So that would be how I teach it now, the most closely, although it's somewhat indirect, but I don't talk about specific issues, real world issues in any of my courses with kids. I rarely even cover it on social media, actually, even though I make content for adults on social media. I mean, I don't get into hot topics, controversial topics, or political topics usually, or if I do, I really abstract it because I don't want people to feel, firstly, like I'm politically biased.
Yeah.
And
No, I understand.
If I'm going to do that, actually, I always will show fallacies on both sides, which is very easy to do. So, I don't know, there's a debate, which apparently this is a hot topic in the pet food world, whether you should use kibble or raw food. So this would be a hot topic among certain groups of people. And so I made a reel with a vet nutrition expert where we showed logical fallacies on both sides. So it's like the sides can't really get triggered because the other side's getting attacked too. So if I'm going to touch on more controversial topics, I try to attack both sides, or else I just stay away from it entirely.
Yeah. No, I think that's very good advice. I think teachers can often get themselves in hot water by, it's always tempting to take something that is a hot topic or in the news and try to kind of use that as an example because it's the real world. But as you say, it's particularly problematic when it comes to politics or other aspects of life. So I love that idea about the pet food. That's a really, it shouldn't be, it's a kind of thing that a lot of students, I imagine, will have an opinion on, and quite a strong opinion on, based on whatever their experience is or what they've read or heard. But it isn't likely to cause a lot of upset with them or with their parents. For example, if you go home and say, oh, we had a discussion about politics today and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I was quite surprised to learn actually that that's such a controversial topic in the world of people who are really into pet food.
Yeah. And so I have to ask, being a cat owner, which is it that you think from what you've come across, or are you going to say it depends?
Yeah, I didn't. So firstly, I know nothing about this area, and I've never owned a cat. I've never looked into buying cat food. What we were covering was bad arguments that people make in support of their side. So, oh, you just want to, buy the raw pet food because your cousin's a butcher and you get the food cheap. If you really cared about your dog, you'd pay for the kibble, this kind of stuff. So just really sort of exaggerated bad arguments, or, well, the raw meat's all natural and natural's got to be better for you. That's actually probably in the top, like maybe 5 logical fallacies I see online these days is the appeal to nature fallacy. Something's better just because it's natural. So I do cover that one quite a bit.
Interesting. And so when you present this to students, you present the actual things that the people say, do you? And then you explore what's behind it, the logical fallacies behind it. Is that the way you would do it?
So to clarify, this example I'm giving about the pet food was a reel. So that was for Instagram, Facebook.
Yeah.
So that's for that's not for kids. It's because you need to be 13 years old to sign up. So that's more for a general audience. When I teach kids with the courses on my site, it's always totally abstracted. So like that, it's all, most of them are taking place in space.
Right. But even if the examples are abstracted, you would approach it that way, would you? You would kind of present what was said and then examine what's behind what is said, or
Oh, I see what
you
you
would get
mean.
them to try and identify the logical fallacies, would you? Or what it may be, how would you approach it? Would you present the kind of logical fallacy and then present what is said, or present what is said, get them to try and see if they can spot any problems with the arguments, and
I
then
get the
present the
question.
logical
Yeah.
fallacy? So I'm just
Yeah.
trying to kind of figure out what you think is the best way of presenting this, if you like.
So what I do, and this is actually what I do both for kids and often for adults, is I give the example first. And then, can you see anything funny with this reasoning? So I don't tell them the fallacy name or anything like that. And I don't expect that kids will know the fallacy name, but they can still try to explain what's wrong with it, right? Like, oh, that person criticized the person talking and didn't criticize the argument. And then they can learn, oh, that's called ad hominem. So then after I give them the chance to see if they can figure out what was wrong with the reasoning, then I tell them the logical fallacy name. And this comes back to what I mentioned before. I think naming things is really important. I think naming fallacies is really important because it helps us to identify them and not just think, oh, there's something wrong here. So if we know the fallacy name, we can identify it and think of other examples and know exactly what's going on. So yeah, back to it. So they try to spot the flaw in reasoning. Then I say the fallacy name. Then I give lots more examples. And then I teach how to respond to it. And then I give an example in the story of the character rationally responding to the logical fallacy, because that's an important skill too. Not just being able to spot fallacies, but what do we do when we're confronted with them?
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Meet USA Study, your one-stop platform for guiding students through their college application journey. Access up-to-date resources on universities, programs, scholarships, and application requirements, all in one place. Get easy-to-access tools, personalized timelines, expert tips, application templates, and exclusive webinars with admissions officers to help your student stand out. Visit usastudy.co.uk or call Phil at 0800 612 8271 because every student deserves the opportunity to shine with USA Study.
Stephanie, what about when you are trying to get students to move beyond the stories that you present, the scenarios that you present? How do you kind of persuade them to kind of make the link? You said that a lot of the students that you've come across, or the people doing your courses, kind of end up looking for them in real life, etc. And how do you kind of persuade them to start doing that, to take that story-based scenario, logical fallacy, etc., and move towards real life? Or does it just naturally happen that they start seeing it in other contexts?
So what I do in the course is after they learn each logical fallacy, they have to write their own story.
Right.
Either ideally, it would be about a time when they've encountered the fallacy in their own life, or if they're having trouble thinking of it, they can write their own, fictional story. And then at the very end of the course, they have to look at a dialogue and identify different phrases as being okay or fallacy so that they can learn to spot the difference. And then after that, the parents told me they just started spotting them. So it's just in their minds after that. And I think they've seen the different fallacies in so many different scenarios that it's pretty easy to start seeing them all over the place. Of course, it would be even better if parents would get involved too. And I even made a logical fallacy handbook for adults so they can learn the fallacies that their kids are learning about. And so that if they're watching a TV show or something, you spot a fallacy, you can pause, like, oh, did you catch that? So I definitely encourage parents and teachers too to get involved with this process. And another thing that you can do is, and I know this might be a little bit controversial because some people think kids shouldn't be on social media at all, but actually my stance is that controlled use is really important because kids need to learn how to use it properly. We can talk more about that later if you want, but you can scroll through social media with your kids and look for logical fallacies together and see if you can spot the mistakes. In general, I do believe that exposing kids to misinformation, but also teaching them that it's misinformation, better prepares them for their future digital lives.
Yeah, definitely. So picking up on what you said about controlled use of social media, I tend to agree. There are kind of age restrictions, etc. That you mentioned one before. I think it was Instagram 13 or 14, was it?
It's 13.
13. But one thing that all teachers or parents, I think, have come up against is that there are age restrictions, but then you do find students of younger ages that are using social media, and it's much better, I suppose, to, if they're going to do that, then the parents, teachers perhaps should know about it and be able to help them rather than not know about it. Is that your opinion too?
Yeah. So to me, and I understand that it could be having a really detrimental effect on children's mental health. So I understand why parents are concerned with letting their kids get on social media at all. But I think it's even more concerning to think what's going to happen when they get to, I don't know, 16 or 18 or whatever age they're able to use it and they have no exposure to it. They haven't learned how to use it properly. I think that's something to be even more concerned about. I mean, us adults now, we never had the training in it, and look what's happening to us.
Yeah.
So of course, parents should make it age appropriate and like an age appropriate level of monitoring their usage and keep an eye out for problematic behaviors like it affecting sleep or them being too secretive on it, or it affecting other healthy activities like exercise. But I do think they need to have some controlled exposure to prepare them.
I agree. I think one of the things that before mobiles became so popular with all ages, mobile phones, I always used to recommend that, if students were using the same computer in the family, for example, a family computer, then the parents would be aware of what they were using it for, take an interest in it. It was always better for that than if the computer was in the child's bedroom, for example, and the parent didn't take an interest in, or didn't really know what the child was using the internet, for example, for, or in a case that I'm thinking of, when they were playing games, didn't know what type of games they were playing or with who, or etc. Now it's more complicated now with cell phones, mobile phones, that younger and younger students tend to have. But how do you think that can be controlled, if you like, or the controlled usage of that can be?
I think there's probably some programs you can add to phone, right, for child safety, although I don't know much about that. The American Psychological Association published do you put show notes on this? Because I can send you the link to the article where they
Sure.
have all
Yeah, that
their
would be good.
recommendations. Their conclusion is that, and I know this is pretty controversial, is social media isn't inherently harmful. You know, it depends, but there can be a lot of benefits for adolescents as well. Sorry, this was their report specifically on social media use for adolescents. They advise, like I said, for if the usage becomes problematic, then maybe you do need to take it away. I think it depends on a case-by-case situation. But that you can gradually give them more and more freedom with age, and as long as they demonstrate that they're using the technology wisely. But I can't really comment on the like child protecting apps because I don't know about that well enough. But I can definitely send you the link to that advisory if you think the listeners would be interested.
Yes, and I'll add that to the information when I publish it.
Yeah.
Definitely, that
So
would be good.
Quite an interesting new study showed that when kids are exposed to misinformation, that is obviously misinformation, like zebras have green stripes, their fact-checking skills or the thoroughness of their fact-checking increased. Have you heard of this research?
I haven't, no, but it
Okay.
makes sense.
Yeah, I'll send you the link to that after too, so
Great.
people can read it. But basically, there were two groups of kids. One of them saw only true facts about animals, obviously true facts. And then the other group saw a mixture of obviously true and obviously false facts. And then they were given an activity where they were given a novel claim, which was Zorpies have 3 eyes. And Zorpies are some sort of alien creature. And then they were shown an image of, I think, 20 Zorpies. And they could click, and all the Zorpies were wearing sunglasses. So you can see how many eyes they have. And you can click to check under a Zorpie's eyes. And then you can choose to click again to check under the Zorpie sunglasses, and then click again to check under another Zorpie's sunglasses to see how many eyes they have. And the kids that had been exposed to the misinformation checked more Zorpies than the kids that didn't. So that was a pretty interesting study, and I hope more research is done into that. But that would suggest that controlled exposure to social media, including misinformation, can actually better prepare kids for the future.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd like to see that, definitely.
Yeah.
I suppose we've always done this, haven't we? You know, I think an example that is very common is like the idea of the Santa Claus myth, the Father Christmas myth, of, you know, coming down the chimney and giving children presents, for example, and how we tell children of a very young age that, and we want them to believe it. And part of the reason why we want them to believe it is because it makes a kind of Christmas, for those who celebrate it, very magical. But another reason, I think, which is more important, is that it comes a point where they start questioning it amongst their peers, that the validity of this, and someone will have found out that it's not true, and they start telling their friends and stuff like that. And then the lesson that the kids learn, of course, is that adults can lie, including your parents. Your parents lie to you. So you shouldn't trust everything that people say. And that's the big lesson, isn't it, really, with that?
Yeah. Actually, Dr. Ronald Crouch, that's the child psychologist I mentioned earlier, wrote an article just about that. And he said that, you know, he encourages the Santa Claus myth and says that what you're also giving them the gift of critical thinking. It's like a first big lesson in critical thinking.
Yeah, definitely. So Stephanie, I mentioned it before, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you think about this. Is that I really think critical thinking is becoming more and more important because of the emergence and proliferation of generative artificial intelligence, with all of these apps that have come out, for example, ChatGPT, that can produce texts within seconds, other image generation apps such as Midjourney and DALI that can produce photorealistic images of places and people that never existed. How do you feel about that and the challenge that teachers have when it comes to helping students with look at these texts or use these tools critically?
Mhm. So that's another example of where I think banning is not the answer. AI is part of our future. We need to learn how to use it properly, how to use it effectively and rationally. So I do think it should be incorporated into lessons, not banned from lessons. We definitely need to be teaching about its limitations. For example, I tried this out pretty recently, and it was with ChatGPT o1. I remembered some research about something, but I couldn't remember the name of the paper. So I described it to ChatGPT, and it said, "Oh yes, you're looking for this paper." And so I checked the paper, and it doesn't exist. They call it hallucination, right? And I tried again, and it did it again, and it kept making up papers that don't exist. I don't know how long this is going to be a problem for. And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges in teaching stuff about AI is every month it's different. So I've been really pondering that, making a course, partnering with some sort of AI expert and making a course about that. But then I think, how long will this be relevant for?
Unfortunately, I think I've got a particular interest in AI, and I've read predictions that say that they think large language models such as ChatGPT will have the hallucinating problem for quite some time.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And if anything, things are only going to get worse because there are people who are posting information that is false. And ChatGPT and other large language models like it can't really distinguish what is false and what is true. So the more information that is out there, if it's connected to the internet, and it's why this idea of, when it comes to research, having kind of verified journals for research or sources that are more kind of valid than others. It's why something on a blog post isn't as valid scientifically, I guess, or research-wise in theory than something that is peer-reviewed and has a kind of respected reputation with a community of academics and stuff like that. That's the kind of thing I think large language models have a difficulty in recognizing unless they're specifically trained to do that.
That's interesting. Yeah, I have been actually looking for an AI expert to interview to put an article on my site because I don't know much about how it actually works. So that's very interesting to me to hear that the hallucination problem isn't going away anytime soon, but it does make sense.
I think one of the things that is going to help that you could probably incorporate is that some of these LLMs now are, when they produce the information, I think Google's Gemini does this, it produces links to the sources where they got the information. So they summarize the information or the answer to the questions that you ask, and then they have little footnotes, and then below the line there's kind of links to the actual source document. If a large language model produces the information with the sources, you can then go back and say, can you remove source number 3 and give me a different answer? So if you can kind of look at the sources critically and say, I'm not sure this is a valid source, then you can ask for a refined answer. from the AI that will just look at the other source. One of the things I came across recently that is a bit troubling, though, because LLMs aim to please, I think,
Yes.
is what I've. So
I
they
was about to bring
hallucinate
that
because
up.
they're trying to give you what you've asked for.
Yeah.
And a troubling thing is that I saw a blog post of someone saying, "Can I change an LLM's opinion about something, not only for me, but then if someone else in another part of the world asks about it, will they get the revised answer that I managed to change, or will they get some kind of random answer?" And so someone used this as an example. He had written a book and he asked for the best books on a particular subject, and his book wasn't there. And so he asked I think it was ChatGPT, to revise the opinion and say, "I think this is the best book on this subject. Could you rethink and produce the list of the 10 best books?" And then his book was number one.
That's
And
interesting. Would that actually show up for other people?
well, what he did as an experiment is he asked, he had a large number of followers on a mailing list or whatever. This is how I came across this. I think it was a Substack. I can't remember the name of the person now. I'll have to look it up because I'd like to go back. And he basically said, "Can you run this question and see what comes back and let me know?" So he asked people around the world to ask the same question he'd asked and to see if his book came up in the results, whether his changing it where he was had an effect elsewhere. Now, I can't remember now. I think that's as far as I got. That's as far as I saw. So I'll need to go and track it
Yeah.
down. I wish I'd made a
I'd be
better
curious
note
to
of
hear
it.
his results.
Because I guess that has serious implications when it comes to, because so many people are using LLMs for search now. If that replaces the way that we usually search for things, then that whole idea of being able to influence results as a marketing tool would gain a lot of traction. And I would imagine a lot of people or organizations might start employing people just to start trying to manipulate the results of the LLMs to get their content higher up in the rankings, if you like. So it's a different type of search engine optimization that could be
Interesting.
happening.
Even
I think
if
that's really worrying.
Yeah.
But if that is the case and you can change the general results that ChatGPT and other AIs actually return on questions, then we're going to see a lot more of that happening.
I think even if that type of manipulation isn't possible, it's still kind of concerning how agreeable it is, how much it wants to give you what you want, because, and not just for the hallucination, but I think it can make the effects of confirmation bias even worse, where you're asking it for certain results, and instead of asking in a neutral way, you ask in a way that it kind of knows the results that you want and gives you the results that you want. And I mean, that's even already a problem with search engines, and even with PubMed. You can pretty much find studies supporting anything you want on PubMed if you're looking for it. But I think it's even more extreme in ChatGPT or other LLMs.
Yeah, unfortunately. I think it's why when it comes to these tools offer so much potential, time-saving potential. And so we're not going to not use them. But it's why, for example, when it comes to research and analysis, there are kind of other tools now. One of them that I know of is Notebook LM, which is another Google tool, which you upload the sources to. So you say to the AI, these are the sources I want you to use, nothing else. And you get them, you ask your questions based on the sources that you've given them. And so long as you've given them reliable sources that you've checked, you've fact checked, you know that these come from, for example, a particular subject you want to research, and you've identified which are the main articles, book chapters, journals, etc. You've uploaded copies of those to this AI, and then you basically just interrogate those articles. So it saves you time because you don't have to spend all the time reading every one of those articles to get, especially that's a great thing to do if you have the time, if you want to be thorough, if you want to become an expert on something. But if you just want to extract particular pieces of data from a large number of sources to be able to make generalizations, and you don't have the time to do it, then this is a way of doing it.
Yeah, it's definitely a huge time saver. I use it for helping to organize my thoughts sometimes. I find that's the best use for me, where I start brainstorming something and I've got all the ideas there, but it's just a mess. And then I get it to organize the ideas, and then I rewrite the thing, because I often don't like the sound of it, the ChatGPT voice that it has. But just that organizing the thoughts step is so valuable. So I'm pretty excited to see the future of AI, and also AI in education. I think it's really interesting, these AI tutors. Really interested to see where that goes.
Yes, definitely. I think you could probably have an AI, or create an AI that would generate examples of your logical fallacies that then students could interrogate.
Yeah, I've tried. Maybe it'll get there soon. It probably will get there soon. O1 is really good at logic and reasoning, and you can present it. I often put on social media really tricky puzzles with counterintuitive solutions. And sometimes the ones that I get so much pushback on from people, I try with ChatGPT and he gets it. With O1 gets them. I don't think ChatGPT 4 would get them all the time, not the really tricky ones, but O1 does. So I'm really impressed with its logical reasoning abilities, but getting it to make good examples of logical fallacies is actually surprisingly difficult.
Right. That's interesting to hear.
Yeah.
I suppose it's always good to hear about the limitations of these tools. I like the fact that there is the hallucination problem, because it means if that didn't exist, and if it was always produced reliable data, then the idea of having a human who knows being able to critically examine would not be necessary anymore. And so it's interesting and probably good for us that we still have a role when it comes to using these tools. And that's why I think the idea of using AI to save time, or supplementing, or brainstorming, etc., but you do need someone who knows the information, or can critically look at the content, or you can't just accept exactly the responses that they get. It means, for example, that these AIs are less likely to replace certain people with certain jobs, especially if they have knowledge, because you need someone to look critically at the responses that are generated and decide whether they're valid or not. I hope that will remain to be the case for a long time.
Yeah, and it will just help us to do more productive work faster.
Exactly, yeah. When it's used as an assistant, I think, or as something to save you time, that's great. It highlights the need for critical thinking, which is what we've been talking about today. So I'm going to draw things to a close, Stephanie. I'd like to thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed talking to you about this.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I love talking to you.
Thank you.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Meet USA Study, your one-stop platform for guiding students through their college application journey. Access up-to-date resources on universities, programs, scholarships, and application requirements, all in one place. Get easy-to-access tools, personalised timelines, expert tips, application templates, and exclusive webinars with admissions officers to help your student stand out. Visit usastudy.co.uk or call Phil at 0800 612 8271 because every student deserves the opportunity to shine with USA Study.
So that brings us to the end of today's Sunday Lunch Show. Many thanks to today's guest, Stephanie Simoes, and all of you who joined us live. Thanks also to those of you listening back to the recording. Now, Stephanie shared with me a link to that article by Dr. Ronald Crouch about Santa Claus. It's at Raising a Skeptical Kid website, and it's called Santa for Skeptics. That's raisingaskepticalkid.com. Since we talked, Stephanie also mentioned that she'd been thinking about the problem about how do we expose kids to controlled misinformation for educational purposes, especially for younger kids, and said that she has an idea to build a fake social media feed for kids. So this is an idea for you all. Something that is kid appropriate but filled with fallacies, sensational headlines, misinformation, etc. You could do that on any social media, I suppose. And then the game would be to identify the problems in each post. To see why it was problematic. So she's going to set that up. You could either do that yourself or follow it. I love that idea, Stephanie, and look forward to seeing how it develops. And I'd love to know if anyone does this, how the kids react to it too. And so that's it from me. There are Teachers Talk radio shows all week on all manner of interesting topics, so please listen in live or back to the recordings. And I hope you will join me again next week at the same time. Thank you very much, and bye for now.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.